Akeome Kotoyoro. We are back with our first episode of 2023. I hope you all are doing well, and here's to another fun and productive year ahead. I would like to invite all of you, our beloved listeners, to join us once again as we continue to explore life in Japan. Today, we will talk to some natives and expats who currently or have lived in Japan about cultural collectivism, food, and how to have a toxic love affair with a bowl of ramen. This is the Kyotopia podcast. My name is Micah, and I am hopelessly Ramentic. In previous episodes, we've talked a little bit about reverse culture shock. When you go back home after living abroad for a while, and you become shocked to find some aspects of your own culture to feel somewhat odd or uncomfortable. I thought it only fair to present the other side of the coin. So I asked a few native Japanese people who have lived abroad, or are currently living abroad, if they ever experienced this phenomenon when they returned to Japan.
Yeah, so maybe my biggest reverse culture shock, maybe like a distance. Especially, I'm living in LA now. I have to use my car. It doesn't matter. So where I want to go, so I have to drive. But in Tokyo, so when I arrive at the airport, so everyone is really close. Yeah, and then of course you get the train and the bus and even the walk in the street. They're so close each other. But I never experienced those kind of stress before I'm living in LA.
I'm originally from Nara, and I was living in Canada on and off about 13 years. When I came back to Japan, I felt awkward because we don't hug each other, even family and close friends. And when I tried to hug my mom felt awkward. So when I tried to hug her, she felt, ew, what are you doing? And I felt shocked.
Japanese people don't say yes or no first, right? We have to follow the winding path to get the answer. That's a kind of usual communication for work and for life. That was quite stressful when I came back.
Also at restaurants, whenever we go out for lunch or dinner in a big group, like nobody starts eating. You don't want to be the first one to start eating. So we feel like we cannot start eating until the boss starts eating. But if the boss doesn't care about these norms, nobody eats. So we just wait and food gets cold, and I don't like that. It seems like nobody wants to be the first ones to do anything.
赤信号みんなで渡れば怖くない. This is an old joke, which means even if it's a red light, if everyone crosses it, it's not scary. I think it's a good representation of the Japanese mentality that it is safe to belong to the majority. And there is a culture that does not accept the existence of different things.
Derukui ga utareru. The nail that sticks out gets pounded down. This is a Japanese proverb. It is often quoted when attempting to categorize Japan as being a collectivist culture. So, what does that mean?
Anyone who's lived in Asia for any length of time, particularly in East Asian culture, and who's from the West, has noticed that there's a real difference in how Asian cultures relate to themselves.
This is a clip from an interview with Daniel Goleman. He's an author and psychologist who is most well known for his work on emotional intelligence.
In Asia, the self is an expanded self. It's your family, it's your unit, it's your clan, It's not just you as an individual. This is in stark contrast to individualist cultures in the West, where it's all about me. And the most extreme cultures this way are Australia, UK, the US, and so on. And this means that there's a very different sense of who my ambition is for. In the East, it's for my company and me. It's my family and me. And in the West, it's more often than not just me. And that creates interesting problems both ways. But it also means that when we relate across cultures, we need to understand what the deep motivation is and what the orientation toward the self is of the people we're working with.
So a collectivist culture emphasizes the interdependence of individuals within a group and prioritizes group goals over individual goals. We can perhaps trace many well-known social behaviors amongst the people in Japan to this group-oriented mindset. When you go to a bar with friends or colleagues and you begin to order, you may hear someone say the phrase, とりあえずビール. It is customary for everyone to order beer first, even if it is not your preferred beverage. You're totally free to order whatever you want. Generally, people don't, as it may feel a little strange to be the one standing out. Also, when eating food with friends at a restaurant, you may hear the phrase, 遠慮の塊. When there's only one piece of food left on a dish, no one wants to stand out as the selfish one who takes the last piece of food.
Yo, this some pink puffy bullshit. I mean, Hello Kitty posters and chocolate.
屋外では人と近くで会話をするとき以外はマスクは必要ありません。徒歩や自転車での通勤など静かに人とすれ違う場面、散歩やランニングのときはマスクは必要ありません。
Although it is not compulsory and the government has even made an official announcement to its citizens that it is okay to not wear masks outside, people still do. Some people do so to stay safe, which is, of course, totally fine. But I have heard a lot from people who still wear masks and complain about it, saying that the only reason they do is because everyone else is. If you were born after 1990, you may not recognize this sound. That, my friends, is the sound of a fax machine. Fax machines were ubiquitous in offices and... Hold on a second. Can you knock that off? I'm trying to do a thing here. Where were we? Right. Fax machines... Really? Screw it, whatever. Fax machines were ubiquitous in offices in the 1980s and 1990s, but have gradually been rendered obsolete by a little thing, you may have heard of it. It's called email. Anyway, many Japanese companies are still using this outdated technology simply because... That's right. Other companies are still using it. On the bright side of this social pressure that comes with the desire to fit in, the society as a whole does benefit. Everyone recycles, the streets and parks are very clean, everyone tries to mind their own business as to not cause any trouble for those around them. Should it matter so much that the motivation for doing good may not be altruistic, but because they are concerned about how they may be perceived if they don't follow suit? Being a Western foreigner in Japan, I stand out by default. I consider this to be both a blessing and a curse. In many cases, I feel there is less expectation for me to follow certain social protocols. This grants me a certain sense of freedom that many natives may not have. Also, from this outsider standpoint, I also started to notice something interesting in regards to this preoccupation with what others think. It reminds me of a television program called You wa nani shi ni Nippon e? The concept for this show is to go to the international terminal in Narita Airport and approach random foreigners arriving in Japan, and then asking them this question. Why did you come to Japan? At a short glance, one might think this show would be about the foreigners, their story, what brought them to Japan, etc. Maybe a simple lesson in foreign culture. But after watching a few episodes, you begin to notice a pattern. What the showrunners want to know is not so much about the foreigners themselves, but about what they love about Japan. It is all about how their culture is perceived from the outside. Again, the emphasis or fascination is with what other people from other cultures think of them. It seems they just want to see themselves through another person's eyes.
Who is the fairest one of all?
Famed is thy beauty, Majesty, but hold, a lovely maid I see.
Go to a bar and strike up a conversation with a local. Why did you come to Japan, or what do you like about Japan, are likely to be one of the first questions. There's actually a very good video by a Japanese-based YouTuber called Dogen. It brilliantly deconstructs the typical conversation a foreigner can expect to have countless times when meeting and socializing with the natives. Dogen's content is great. He's perhaps best known for his short comedic skits, which to me serve as a perfect blend of humor and social commentary. If you're curious, that video I mentioned, I'll put a link of it in the details of this episode, so please be sure to check that out. Dogen senpai, please notice me.
黄昏先輩好き
So, yeah, I do get asked this question a lot. Why do you like Japan? And to answer, I used to go into this very long-winded backstory of what brought me here, why I decided to study Japanese, and believe it or not, especially during that time, I had a tendency to make things unnecessarily philosophical. When I did this, I often noticed my listeners' eyes soon begin to gloss over. Their polite smiles and patient nods suggested that maybe I was being a bit KY, maybe this wasn't the kind of answer they were looking for. So one day, as a sort of experiment, I decided to simplify it and just said, Nihon no ryori ga suki, or I like the food. And with that, everything changed. This new answer was received with elation. And I would just leave it at that. Everyone's happy. What most people wanted out of this conversation was something simple and concrete that they could see their own culture and be proud about it. And I think they should be proud. The food here is quite good. But I think that's not quite fair. So I thought for this episode we would pick up this topic, dust it off a bit, and perhaps go a bit deeper. Maybe have a real conversation about food in Japan.
Japanese food in general, I very much enjoy. I don't think I found anything that I don't like. You know, all the typical things like natto or something else, like raw fish or something, sushi or something that other people have problems with. Like I really like these things, really enjoy them.
I think in Japan, there's almost a guarantee of a certain level of service and the quality, flavor, and taste of the food. You wouldn't expect to walk into any type of establishment and not have a satisfactory experience. It wouldn't matter where you are in Japan. You can count on that.
The first time I arrived in Japan and I saw this company open all the time, and I was like, wow, I can get food, and pretty good food, pretty cheap food at any time of the day. It won't be closed. There won't be any problem. I don't have to go to a restaurant. I can just eat food from different companies, try out everything. I think the first time I came to Japan, like 2018, and I think I only ate, I'm not kidding, I only ate onigiri for a week from company. I don't think I've been once to a restaurant, and I just loved it. I was onigiri, fuck yeah, I love that stuff.
From the neon-lit alleys of Tokyo to the tranquil streets of Kyoto, the country boasts an abundance of high-quality food options that are sure to satisfy any palate. At an izakaya, the smell of sizzling yakitori and the sound of clinking beer mugs always fill the air as patrons indulge in an array of savory small plates. The convenience store, a ubiquitous fixture of Japanese society, is a treasure trove of snacks and ready-to-eat meals, from onigiri rice balls to crispy fried chicken. Of course, who could forgive me if I failed to mention sushi, which is the iconic dish of Japan. I'll never forget the first time I experienced otoro as it melted in my mouth. The variety and quality of food in Japan is a reflection of the country's passion for the culinary experience. And it doesn't really matter who you are. While staying in Japan, you'll never have trouble finding something to eat.
Yeah, well, that's changed a lot.
Wait, what?
Like, what's available and like my preferences as well, because before I moved here I was vegan.
Oh right, vegans.
Which was a totally easy thing to do in the UK, but when I got here 10 years ago it was not an easy thing to do. Even if you were cooking for yourself, like non-meat alternatives just weren't really a thing.
Despite this incredible variety and quality of food in Japan, vegetarians and vegans may face some difficulties in finding accommodating meals. This is because Japanese cuisine often relies heavily on animal products, such as meat, fish, and dashi, which is a broth made from fish flakes. Many Japanese dishes, even those that appear to be vegetarian, may contain small amounts of animal products, or are cooked in a broth that contains them.
The general perception of veganism in Japan is people think of it as a healthy diet, but it's more like a trend, and they only kind of focus on the food itself and not so much what is the driving force behind it. Most of the time they don't really care about animal welfare or why we shouldn't be eating them. So, it kind of stops there, but I think it is a good start.
Japan has a culture and linguistic barrier when it comes to vegetarianism and veganism. The Japanese language does not have a direct translation for the word vegetarian or vegan. Instead, people say no meat or no fish to indicate that they do not contain animal products. Additionally, traditional Japanese cuisine tends to place little emphasis on vegetables as a primary component of a meal, which can make it difficult for people to comprehend why someone would choose to follow a vegetarian or vegan diet.
And then the other thing is that I think the percentage of vegetarian and vegan people living in Japan is extremely low compared to a country where I am living right now. So when somebody tells them that, hey, I'm vegan, they don't really know what to do with this.
It's not uncommon for Japanese people to be puzzled by the concept of vegetarianism or veganism, as it is not something they are exposed to on a regular basis.
So I kind of gave up on the veganism because I had to. But compared to then, now, like our local supermarket down the street has a whole bunch of like veggie non-meats, like sausages, ham, like burger patties. They have all sorts now.
In recent years, there has been a growing awareness of vegetarian and vegan diets in Japan, and some restaurants are beginning to cater to these dietary restrictions. It's important for those following a vegetarian or vegan diet to communicate their needs clearly when ordering food, and to be aware that it may still be difficult to find accommodating meals in some areas of Japan. There may also be some limitations, even for those of us who are not restricted by such a diet. For example, some foods that are commonly or readily available in other parts of the world can be either difficult to find, expensive, or of different quality or variety. For example, bacon. Although it's available here, it is often thinner and leaner than what is typically found in other countries. I mean, let's just be honest. It's essentially just thinly sliced ham. Cheese here is often more expensive than in other countries due to import costs and a lack of dairy farms in the country. The variety of cheese available is also more limited, with most local supermarkets only offering a small selection of cheeses, such as camembert and what I would call a very, very dull cheddar. Also, fruit can be very expensive here. The quality is good, but for example, premium fruits such as melons and grapes can cost upwards of $100 or more, making them a luxury item for many. Whether due to import costs, a lack of local production, or cultural differences in tastes, after living here for a bit, these holes in the availability of what is familiar can give rise to what I like to call the great craving.
64 slices of American cheese. 64?
This is probably why every time I go back to the States to visit my family, I end up having stomach problems. By the end of my trip, I've usually gained at least 3 kilograms.
Have you been up all night eating cheese?
I think I'm blind.
I think there's an adjustment period where you have a sort of preferred flavor palette that you are brought up on in your home country, unless you had the privilege of moving around a lot, which I did not when I was younger. And so, America has some nice food, but America, oil, salt, and sugar are kind of 3 of the main things that, for better or worse, make up the American food palette. There's more to it than that. But so, you come to Japan and you notice for foods that have sugar, like baked goods and such, pastries, there's a lot less sugar in them. For foods that are prepared with oil, they tend to be a lot less oilier. And for foods that are salted, they tend to be a little less salty. So I think my first impression of Japanese food was, gosh, it's very light on flavor in some ways. So I think there's like a period where your flavor palette kind of readjusts. And then curiously enough, once it readjusts, it's actually hard to go back the other way. So you go to the United States now and you get like a store-bought supermarket birthday cake. And oh my God, there's so much sugar in it. It feels like your teeth are just going to fall out as soon as you take a bite.
I think there is still a part of me that hasn't fully adjusted. Don't get me wrong. I love Japanese food. It would be a challenge I definitely do not want to face, to adjust back to an American diet, but I still crave the salty and oily food I was brought up on. This is the part of myself I want to confront today. So, to tell the truth, although I've been kind of avoiding it up until this point, I actually started this episode as a sort of intervention for myself. Okay, I'm just gonna say it. I think I have a ramen problem. Yes, ramen. The beloved Japanese noodle soup. It comes in a variety of styles, each with its unique taste and preparation. Shoyu is the most traditional style, features a clear broth made from soy sauce paired with chashu pork, memma bamboo shoots, and green onions. Shio, on the other hand, features a lighter salt-based broth, along with seaweed, chashu pork, and other toppings. Of course, there's miso ramen. It's a bit of a newer addition to the ramen family, with broth made from fermented soybean paste, and this creates a rich, hearty flavor. And of course, there's tonkotsu ramen, which is a more thick, creamy broth made by boiling pork bones for hours, which results in a broth that is rich and flavorful. The list goes on and on, but I'm not talking about... I don't have a problem with any of these various types of ramen. I only have a problem with ramen jiro. Ramen jiro is the Godzilla of the ramen world. A giant among giants. A beast among beasts. It's a meal that is not for the faint of heart, but rather for those who seek a challenge. I first discovered ramen jiro when I worked in Tokyo, in a station a little bit outside the city called Hibarigaoka. And every time I commuted to work, I had to pass by this ramen shop. During my lunch break, every time I would go towards the station to find either a restaurant to eat at, or just pick up a few things at the local kombini, I would always pass this ramen shop, and there was just an enormous line of people waiting. One day, after work, I was in no rush to get home. I figured I would see what all the fuss was about, so I stepped in line and waited. And I had no idea.
The shop itself was really interesting in that it almost felt like the entryway to a point of no return.
This is Hinti Lim from the previous episode. He visited me in Kyoto recently, and I sort of insisted that he join me to have lunch at the Kyoto branch of Ramen Jiro.
Once we got deep enough into the line, there was no turning back. Like, there were people in front of us, there were people behind us, and it was kind of like, well, we've made our choice. In that sense, there was this procession of everyone marching towards their doom, so to speak.
As the line approached the entrance and we were able to catch a glance inside, you notice there's only 8 seats, all at the counter, which surround the chef in his kitchen.
There was a feeling that it was all business. Everyone buys their tickets and they sit down, they hang up their coat, mentally prepare themselves, and then this bowl of ramen gets brought out, and there's very little in the way of talking. Even when people are there in groups of 3 or as couples, once the bowls of ramen come out, everyone's just kind of rolling up their sleeves and slurping down.
Other ramen styles are known for their visually striking presentations with a wide range of colors. Miso ramen, for instance, typically features a reddish-brown broth and bright green scallions. Sometimes other colorful toppings, such as corn or seaweed. Tonkotsu ramen has its creamy white broth. But the broth of Ramen Jiro is a thick, heavy, oily soup, and it appears as a murky, grayish-brown color, sort of resembling the color of sewage water. The mountain of bean sprouts on top, which is a staple ingredient of Ramen Jiro, adds a green accent to the dish. However, the bulk of the toppings are chashu pork and garlic, which just sort of adds to this deathly color.
And honestly, when the bowl came out, I wasn't sure at the time when it was presented to me. I was like, I don't know if I can finish this, because it was jam-packed. It had the noodles were really thick, the broth was really fatty. I can't remember how many slices of meat chashu were in there. It was 2, because they were big. And I was like, can I actually do this? But do it I did.
Every time it arrives, there is this moment of awe and fear. You know what you've gotten yourself into, and you can't back down. That anticipation and hunger had been too much to resist, and now you're staring down the barrel. When you start to near the halfway point, you may start to panic. Thoughts of doubt may enter your head. Can you really finish this? Will you be able to endure the shame of admitting defeat? But if you keep fighting, something strange may begin to happen. The fear and panic starts to melt away, and it gets replaced by a growing sense of determination. You decide that you're going to finish the bowl no matter what. And then with each bite, that garlic taste starts to grow stronger, like a constant reminder of the challenge you'd forced upon yourself. Once you reach that last bite, and it's finally over, I always feel a sense of triumph and accomplishment. But that victory is bittersweet. That painful feeling of having eaten too much starts to set in, and that lingering garlic flavor would remain for days to come. You place your bowl at the top of the counter, pay respects to the chef, and you stumble out of the restaurant, full to the point of bursting. You know you'd experienced something special, but you're not sure if it's something you would ever do again. But for the moment, you can only really think of doing one thing.
I'm going in the field to lie down. I'll lie beside the grass.
And I keep going back. I live in the north of Kyoto near Ichijoji, which is a notorious area. It's called Ramen Street. There's well over 30 different ramen shops on that single street, but I always end up going back to Ramen Jiro. I think because it satisfies that American palate that still remains in me. It's very oily, heavy, and to be honest, a bit gluttonous. It's not for everyone, but if you're looking for a challenge and a unique experience, why don't you give it a try?
The grass, yellow flower in the grass.
Or don't. Just don't. Maybe just walk away. It might be better. That's all the time we have for today's episode. Thank you all for joining me on this ride. I would like to thank all the people who I interviewed for this episode. Henry, Axel, Sam, Matt, Lauren, Kosaku, Akina, Yumiko, Kumi, Kobayashi, Henti, Victor. Thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts. And thanks to all of you for listening. If you are interested in supporting this podcast, please check out our Patreon website, www.patreon.com/Kyotopia. If you really would like to help, please share our podcast with someone who you think might enjoy it. That's it for today. それではまた次回。さようなら。